And my name is Sean Manion, and along with Yael Bizouati-Kennedy, we wrote a book called Blockchain for Medical Research, Accelerating Trust in Healthcare. This was actually published at the end of March, although if you haven't noticed, there's something called a pandemic going on globally. So it was only last week that we got our physical copies of this for the first time. They did have some for those who had purchased them online, so other people got them before we did, and we got pictures from all over the world. So if you have a copy of the book somewhere and you want to post it somewhere notably local and send it to us, we always appreciate these pictures, or on LinkedIn if you see us there. So having just gotten our books and having had a really good time putting these things together, putting this book together, we decided, what if we could revisit a little bit of it? And so going back when we first started talking about this book, Yael, who I will let introduce herself as we go into the next section, so that she can do it properly, so I don't miss things. But basically, she's a journalist and knows how to write and speak to people in a way that I, as a scientist, haven't quite learned and probably won't ever master. But we had been working together on a couple of projects, and I had some ideas for what blockchain can do for research, and she had explored blockchain in a lot of different capacities. And I said, hey, let's work together and maybe write a book. And she was very excited and had a lot of ideas about how we could do that. But one of the key ideas was, let's talk to a lot of people. And she, as a journalist, was able to interview a lot of different people. So as we're getting this book, and things are a lot different than they were last year when we wrote a book about blockchain and accelerating research, and all of a sudden in a pandemic, it's highly relevant once again. And we said, hey, maybe we could re-interview some of these people. And so we had the chance to talk to a lot of people informally, and Yael was able to formally interview a wide range of people from the private sector, the public sector, academia, medicine, science, tech people, and people in the blockchain space. And so with that, we said, re-interviewing them, talking to them again, might give us new insights, given that, what we're all dealing with is now something that makes what we were talking about in the book, and what a lot of the people we interviewed in the book have been talking about for years, highly relevant. And that's bringing blockchain to healthcare, blockchain to medical research. And so we're gonna have a couple of events this week, next week. If it goes well, maybe we'll make it a longer series, and we're going to revisit some of the ideas in the book. And with that, we're going to be able to say, are these ideas able to be impactful now? And I think the answer is yes, because I'm already having conversations with people at Health and Human Services and other places. But how quickly can they be helpful? How quickly can they improve some of the situations that we're dealing with on a lot of different levels? Blockchain is not a single solution. It is like bringing the next level of web technology, Web3, to bear. It is an array of different solutions to different problems, some of which we don't even know are problems that can be solved yet. So I think rather than go into heavy detail in the book today, and in the weeks ahead, I might do a little bit of, hey, let's look at this section and see how it applies now. I want to let Yael introduce herself, and then start a conversation and a re-interview with one of our favorite people to talk to, those who know him, Dr. Alex Cahana, who is the Chief Medical Officer here at Consensus Health, who's been, I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Consensus Health. They are my employer, but they've also been kind enough to both let me use the Workday and sponsor this conversation and bringing people together. But Alex Cahana is somebody who's been preaching the word of what blockchain can do for healthcare and research for a long time. I think people are finally starting to listen. It took a pandemic, but I've been listening to him for a while, and it's been very educational every time I do. And every time he talks, I get a new aspect. He's never says the same thing twice in the same way. But I know Yael and he had a great conversation, and we were able to work some of the highlights of that into the book, but they talked about so much more. And with that, I'm going to let them start that conversation up. And so, Yael, if you could start with a little introduction of yourself, and then Alex, when you start speaking as well, so people have a good sense of who you are, and then by all means, let us revisit blockchain for medical research.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. So I'm Yael, and I'm the co-author of the book. I'm a journalist by trade. I'm French originally, but I've been living in the US for 20 years, so I do have an accent. And I've been writing about blockchain for about a few years, 3 years, maybe 3, 4 years at this point. And across my writing, I met Sean, and he was one of my sources. And I interviewed him on several occasions for various articles. And that's how I came to meet him. And after a few months, Sean had this idea about writing the book. And he asked me if I would be interested in working with him on it. So that's how we came across this project. And we started, I believe, writing it. And Sean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but a year and a half ago, something like that. Anyway, the book was published, so was written and published after it was published during the pandemic, but written pre-pandemic. But it is very timely, addresses a lot of current issues. And so I'm very excited to be able to revisit some of the question I had for Alex when I interviewed him for the book. So that's me. Alex, if you could please briefly introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and congratulate again Yael and Sean. It's really important, the work that you did. It's important for the space. We're at a point in time where these contributions that demystify the digital future that awaits us are extremely important. And you've been able to create a writing that is not only accurate, but also very humanistic, and that's extremely important. Many of these texts kind of lend themselves to be very technical, and it's good to fall asleep if you do it in the evening, but it's really more something that responds to the inquisitive mind. So I do want to congratulate on how important that was, especially since you're dwelling not only on the what and how, but more importantly on the why. Why are we doing this, and why are we moving towards from a digital world to an intelligence world, and what is Web 3.0 tools at all? So again, congratulations. I want to thank everybody that's joining us and encouraging you to turn on your videos. There's nothing more depressing than talking to a black, dark screen or static pictures that I can't tell if there's it's frozen or that's the screensaver. So your smiling faces and sometimes concerns of what I said is a good feedback to maybe refine some of the things that hopefully I'll try to convey in the most, I would say, simple but not simplistic way. I am what is known as a physician who had a nonlinear career, trained as a military physician, anesthesiologist, emergency medicine, but pain doctor mostly. So for over 26 years, I've been used to hearing patients who are complaining. So I'm used to hearing bad news. And I think I had only one patient that kind of came and said, "Good news, doc, I had pain." So I'm used to hearing that, and built multiple pain departments around the world. So it's safe to say that I'm familiar with the global healthcare practice, industry, business, I would say vocation. I'm always a systems thinker, always trying to help instead of one at a time, perhaps maybe dozens, hundreds, thousands, why not millions nowadays at a time. For 15 years, I've been involved in technology integration into the clinical workflow, and how can we leverage technology to empower us and enable us to be better versions of ourselves. And I'm sure that we're going to talk about this during the next 45 minutes. And in the last 5 years, specifically in Web 3.0 tools, distributed ledger technology, but also privacy preserving technologies, different types of learning technologies, some of them centralized, some of them decentralized. So I've been very fortunate to really be exposed to a lot of smart people who taught me a lot of smart things. And I'll finish by saying that these are inspiring times. When people ask me, what's the difference between pre-COVID and now, they expect me to say, well, I'm virtual and I don't eat out. And like Sean alluded to, no, the difference is that now people are calling me and saying, Alex, what's that thing you've been working on? So I think that people are starting to see the relevance of what we are doing, what you've written about. And this is an attestation that we're just moving forward to a world where we understand that this is not a Hollywood story of good guys, bad guys, but more like a Greek tragedy. Either we'll all win or we'll all lose.
Thanks, Alex. So I'm going to start, in the book, we argue that at its root, blockchain is people. It's actually a whole chapter that we wrote. And Alex, when I interviewed you for the book, you said that in general, your one-liner is that blockchain is the solution to the social issue of trust. And I'm quoting you here. You said, we live in a world where I want to trust everything, but I can't. And by virtue of decentralization and coding rules of behavior, it has a certainty of the trustworthiness to the transaction. So can you elaborate a little bit on this? And can you revisit that statement? And do you think it's even more pertinent now in light of the pandemic?
Of course, of course. I would like to clarify and say that when I mean trust, I mean a lot of things. I mean, obviously, trust in the colloquial sense is that I want to believe that you are you. You know, I'm seeing real images of real people and not some AI-generated deep fakes, and that your responses are real and authentic. But also the aspect of computational trust. That when we transact between us, be it information, be it anything of value, I want to make sure that that information that's based on data is trustworthy, it's truthful, that 2 + 2 is 4. And we are reaching into a very interesting time where science has evolved to the point where it is capable of generating I would say we use the word alternate realities. It's not just different interpretations, but really we can be very easily confused. The world is more nuanced, the world is more sophisticated. And just like I said in the interview, I'm an optimistic person. I want to believe everybody. I want to think that the salmon that I'm eating is really salmon and not some pink something that looks like salmon. And I think that not far from today, we'll have these swabs or scanners that we can use on our phone that will show that that's a DNA of a fish and not a DNA of something plastic. I would love to sign a contract that I know that says what it's supposed to say. And if there's a digital attestation that can reassure that and insert that computational trust. And I would like also that the news that I hear, or the books that I read, or the articles that I'm looking at, their resources, their references, really are based on information that is traceable, auditable, that I can do my own research and, you know, deep dive into it, you know, and understand what's there. So if anything, the pandemic, as you suggest in your question, has accelerated all this. If I just look at this morning's news, just to be for today, that where states are instructed to send their information directly to the federal government and bypass the expertise of the agency that is responsible for over 75 years of our public health. It's shocking. It's shocking. And this is not a political statement. This is, as all people, we respect science. We respect scientific thinking. We want simply to be well informed. And then based on that information, we can make our own decisions. So I think that the possibility that I can't trust what I see is undermines basically our ability for autonomy, for agency, for our ability to consent, and it is a central structure in the way we interact between each other.
Right, and just to follow up on that, are you still, you say that you're an optimistic person, are you still optimistic?
Yes, because it's not me that I'm optimistic. I read smarter people than me that explain to me what it is to be human, what is humanity, what are the things that connect us. And if I try to be, I would say, philosophical for a second, if I look, for example, to the writings of Immanuel Kant, who talked about morality and what it is to be human, then he has his categorical imperatives. He has these things that have to be. And so he has multiple rules, but two basic ones is one, don't treat people like they're your instrument, and so that is something that we can understand, that it's not cool to do that. If you want something from me, then just say it and don't utilize me. But the second one, which is actually his first categorical imperative, is do not lie. Don't lie. And he doesn't say don't lie because that's one of the commandments, or he says don't lie because your mom told you not to lie. He said don't lie because it's not logical to lie. Because if we start all of us to lie, then the fabric of how we work upon just disintegrates. And so by the virtue of the survival of everyone, we will at some point opt to do the right thing. Now, maybe it'll take time. Maybe many more people have to die in the United States until we do the right thing. But eventually we will do the right thing in regard to this pandemic or COVID-20 or 21 or anything else. So in that vein, I say eventually we will just see, even from an economic perspective, from a transactional perspective, from a gains perspective, we cannot sustain any type of interaction if the basis is not on trust. And if no one here can trust that what I'm saying is remotely true, or I cannot trust that what you're asking me is based on some genuine knowledge, it makes no sense to have this conversation. And if you put on top of that, not just trust, but also computational trust, the code. Okay, the code doesn't get greedy, doesn't get lazy, doesn't get sad, doesn't get, I need to go on vacation. The code executes what it's supposed to do. And so if we can rely on information that sits on append-only records that are called ledgers, and these ledgers are locked using mathematically impermeable hack-proof or close to hack-proof technology that is distributed by multiple eyes of people that are invested to maintain the system, to make sure that it works, then it's just simple behavior economics that makes sure that things are going to continue and work well. So it's not a question of optimism. It's a question of just knowing behavior economics, game theory, and human behavior.
Well, on that note, actually, it's my following question, so it's a good tie-in from what you were just saying, is that, so when I interviewed you for the book, you said that one of the barriers to adoption was human nature, because people are greedy. So can you explain what you meant by that, and do you still stand by this?
Yeah, I think that I think I gave a list of a whole bunch of things, not just greedy, but
No.
but greedy is fine. What I would say is that it's more about change. I'm sure that the audience, and for those who definitely heard me speak before, the 5 stages of Kubler-Ross. She was a psychiatrist in the 60s that dealt with grief and end of life. She described 5 stages of change or loss. The first one is denial. Okay, someone passes or something traumatic or dramatic happens, we just deny and business as usual. Then after denial comes anger. We're upset. Oh, this Bitcoin, I just bought tons of Bitcoin and I lost Bitcoin, and what's that Bitcoin? And so, okay. Then comes the bargaining. Maybe it's not Bitcoin, it's Ethereum, it's Litecoin, it's Ripple, it's, I don't know, maybe blockchain, all these cryptocurrencies and blockchain, they're not the same thing, it's something else. So the bargaining. Then there's like depression, where it's like, oh, this is so bad. What's happening is so bad. It's like we're in free fall. It's like we don't care about anything anymore. And that's good because that means that we're close to the next and last step, which is acceptance. And so I think that it's less about greed and it's more behavior that what I call is acts of defiance. You know, when you talk to someone rationally and they do something completely different that catches you by surprise, it's like, why did they do this? And I think of it more as an act of defiance. And that act of defiance usually is based on one of two things. One is angst. People are just, really worried about change, about unforeseen consequences or unintended consequences. People are worried to maintain their current well-being. So this is legitimate. I don't fault anybody who wants to. We all worked very hard to be where we are. We don't want to lose that. And then there's a second element, which is being unvalued or misvalued or disvalued. People don't like to be thought of as part of the problem. They don't want to say, everything you did, Sean, everything you did in research. It's like all this false publications and all this bogus, it's all your fault because you're the scientist in the room. You've been doing it for 2.5 decades. And so I would start many times when I was as a physician in pain medicine, start my talks by saying the opioid epidemic is my fault. That was it. And everybody's like, no, it can't be. I say, yes, it is my fault. For years, I thought that practicing the way I practice was correct. So there was no malicious behavior. There was no badness. It was, this is what we thought was right. And as science advanced and as evidence accumulated, as we understood things, we changed the way we practice. So that's why we're not phased of with masks, without masks. We're old enough to remember, babies, you have to put them on their back and then put them on their belly and then put them on their back again. And it changes every time. That's the nature of science. And so it's not really about, there are malicious actors, for sure. There are people that their agenda is to harm the ecosystem. But if I look at everything from a biomimicry perspective, from a natural perspective, there's everything. There are people that are producers, there are people that are non-producers, and there are people that are counter-producers. It's all, the nature can sustain all of it. Where it can sustain is if there's a lack of balance. And what we're sensing right now is that the balance is out of whack. It's imbalanced. And that we have to really rethink the design of the ecosystem that we live in. We have to understand what is maintaining these disincentives that are creating this ecosystem to be non-sustainable. And that's the system thinking. It's not the reduction of saying, it's that's fault and it's because of that and play this optimization game, but to understand what are the forces that are maintaining whatever is perverse in the system. And that's why I hate the word recovery, because it means to cover again. We need to redesign. We need to redesign a non-rivalrous economic system. I'm not talking about something like, we're going to live in a post-monetary world and we see all these science fiction stuff that's going. No, I'm not there. I'm there that with the rules of engagement that we interact between us, there are non-sustainable behaviors. So how do we make sure that we encourage good behavior, like coming to this podcast or a webcam meeting, or writing books, or doing good research, or doing a praiseworthy project, and discourage things that are harmful for the ecosystem. So I think that it's, and when people say, we gotta get back to normal, or when are we gonna get back to normal? I say, no, we're never gonna get back to normal, because normal is what got us into this mess in the first place. And so for me, it's really about to sit down in scientific thought, systems thinking, analyzing the stakeholder forces, understand what are the pain points, what are the grievances, what is the motor behind maintaining these non-sustainable forces, and how do we address it in a conducive way.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex.
So following up and actually touches on something you were just talking about. In the book, we discuss that science and medicine are two of the industries that are really slow to change and slow to adoption and blockchain adoption for a lack of, for a variety of reasons, lack of incentives, as you were just mentioning, too many actors, etc. So has your stance on adoption and the rapidity of adoption changed in the past 4 months? And do you think that people are being more open to blockchain, and do you think barriers are being lowered?
Well, there are days that I wake up that I think, wow, this is a really good day. So today is one of those days. Is that dozens of people that are on board, and they're asking great questions in the chat, and you feel that things are moving, but then you realize that it's for the long run. And there's a reason why science and scientific thought and rigor and skepticism are good elements in the scientific thinking. So I'm not adopting a stance that things have to change with speed and things have to change, with a tsunami of events that will destabilize. But I do think that going back to the idea of trust, is that we have to be humble and honest about things. That wishful thinking and spontaneous resolution are very poor strategies to cope with the global problems that we are facing right now. And I think that this is where Web3 technologies and distributed ledger technology in particular stress a very important distinction that I think most people don't make. And that is the difference between coordination and centralization. Coordination is absolutely important, that with this new global biological warfare, if you wish, the questions are so humongous that suddenly we realize that we have to collaborate and we have to coordinate efforts. And I think that we are witnessing a scientific collaboration at a level that we have not seen ever. And where people from all over the world are trying to contribute their data, their knowledge, their know-how to get to these answers quickly and accurately and efficiently. The problem with it is that it's based on the goodness of our hearts. There's no real economic or systemic economic incentive built or ingrained in it, which would lead me to think that when COVID galore is over, this will maintain itself. It's almost like now the subways are so pristine. It's just amazing in New York how clean they are. I'm like seeing stuff I've never seen before. But I just wonder, because there's no economic incentive to build and to keep it clean, how long will it take when everybody's going to start to go again? So we have here an opportunity where Mother Nature stopped us and said, guys, what you're doing is not working, okay? And you have to seriously redesign this ecosystem. And if you're not going to do it, I'm going to hit you again with a COVID-20, 21, 22, until finally you'll understand that you have to create a type of peer-to-peer economy that is inclusive. And people don't understand what centralization does or why decentralization is important. They don't understand that centralization is vulnerable for security reasons, because it's much more easier to attack a honeypot that has $1 billion in it than a billion pots that have $1 in it. They don't understand the collusion vulnerability. Or if they do, they severely underestimate it, where a couple of teams and a couple of groups, and we've seen that in science, and Sean has written a lot about it, the fake science that's coming out that we have to publish or perish, and we kind of fudge the numbers and between us, and we copy results of one group and put it on another, and then you have to go through things and say, wait, did I read this somewhere else? So it's collusion vulnerable, and it's also censorship vulnerable, because like I mentioned before, if hospitals have to send now, or are instructed to send that information directly to the federal government without a representative or a trustworthy validator, then it makes you wonder about the veracity of the data and the actionable information that's going to come out of it. And there are states where we know that people were relieved from their positions because they told the truth. So when people understand that centralized systems, as much as they can be standard of care and streamlined and powerful and have a lot of money and can do stuff very quickly, they are vulnerable to hacking, to collusion, and to censorship. And so we live now in an opportunity where we can explain these things, and that people can more comfortably adopt new versions, because the centralization, decentralization is not an and or, it's not a black or white, it's a spectrum of things, a spectrum of behaviors. And so how can we insert safeguards that can enable this trust that we're looking for?
Thanks. And this is going to be my last question, actually. So before getting it back to Sean. So going back to my first question and your first statement saying that blockchain is the solution to the social issue of trust, where do you think the trust, and I know it could take like a few hours to discuss that, so let's try to keep it brief, but where do you think the trust has been broken in the pandemic? And do you think that we'll be able to get a vaccine faster with blockchain by augmenting trust?
Yeah, first of all, I promise to be brief, be bold, and be brilliant, and then be gone. but I would say that the pandemic exposed these vulnerabilities. It exposed how little capacity we have, because when you have a just-in-time kind of supply chain and you have exactly 4 rolls of toilet paper and suddenly you need 5, then there's no toilet paper. And it also showed that we are vulnerable in capabilities and the ability to bounce back. And now suddenly the PPE galore is going to happen again, and suddenly, so I think that it's people are starting to understand that it's not one thing that's broken, but there's a whole process, that there's something fundamentally wrong in this design. And so that's where suddenly economists start to think. That's where suddenly system scientists start to come in. That's where people that understand standards and understand large scale operations know how to distinguish between optimization aspects of how do I make things better, faster, cheaper, versus really structural engineering design. And that's the secret sauce, because blockchain can do a lot of things that other things that are not blockchain can do as well. But the secret sauce in distributed ledger technology is the peer-to-peer technology. It's the peer-to-peer interaction, sorry. It's the peer-to-peer economy. So that I can talk to you without anybody in between, proving you that I am me and you are you. And if I say something to you, and that transaction could be a bill of $20 or an Excel sheet that says stuff that is worth $20, you can be sure that that is trustworthy because it has the computational trust embedded in it. And that is why suddenly people are saying that, wow, this is great for supply chain. This is really great for certification, immunity, passport, identification. It's portable. That maybe, you know, I don't have to put 20 times my name on Swissair when I want to fly to Geneva every time and they get my name wrong and all that. They finally see that in revenue cycle management, it could help, and that I get, you know, the right bill for the right procedure for the right person. And so, and it can accelerate the discovery of vaccines and make sure actually that the vaccines go transparently and equitably to the people who need it. And maybe the PPP, the distribution of my tax, I can see actually to where it goes, who gets it, why did they get it, what is the outcome, what is the result. So that's, I think, why people are, once they understand the secret sauce, that it's not other things that they read in the newspaper, then they really get excited about it.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. That was fascinating. And we could talk for hours, I think. So thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And I'm going to kick it back to Sean for Q&A.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, and I appreciated hearing that too, because so last year when Yael was able to interview the people for the book, she would set them up, she would interview them, and then I would get the notes from them, and I would get to read through those notes, which was nice. But I was sad I wasn't in those conversations all the time. Many were people I had been able to talk to as well, so that was good. But it's nice to be here for the conversation, because it flows better than the transcript will. And that was awesome. So thank you both. That was an excellent conversation. I am sorry Nicole Tay could not be here, but I think Alex, you are no short on ideas and insights on this, and I'm glad you were able to help us kick this off, because it really is the big picture that I wanted to do at the beginning of the series of this, and I hope to revisit some smaller niches. I think one of the things that you touched upon that I find to be most relevant, thinking about what we wrote about and talked about last year into this year, and now the current situation 4 months later, is how has this changed the situation? How has the pandemic changed the situation for blockchain applications in healthcare and in research especially? I feel like it's accelerated it considerably. I feel like while it doesn't seem like it on a day-to-day basis, I was saying a few years ago, science will be blockchain by 2025. I at one point wondered if I would be correct about that. At this point, I think it's going to be much faster, and there's already elements of it happening much faster, because essentially the disruption that needed to occur to get widespread change and acceptance of changing a legacy system has now come very much into the immediate need for everybody. We understand that the disruption that we've just faced makes our old situation very untenable, because we never know if this is going to happen again. And so while it wasn't worth it to really look at blockchain a few years ago to put a new system or a new structure in, that would take a while. It would take a while to set up. It would take a while to test. It would take a while to do a human-centered design that would make it really work. Now it seems worthwhile. And I see that happening much more rapidly than I ever could have conceived of. It's still not, oh, snap, we're going to go to blockchain. It's very hard to shift gears, especially when you're panicked, especially when you're nervous. Moving to, doing the old much faster is what we're trying to do now, and that's great. But I think we're starting to see behind the scenes, we need to set up a structure so that if we ever need to accelerate at warp speed vaccine research again, we're not trying to do it on the tracks that were set up for a very rickety wooden train. We're doing it on high speed tracks, and we don't have those high speed tracks now. So you can throw more fuel into the fire to get the train moving faster, but you might end up wrecking the train or not being able to make it around the turn. So we need that infrastructure, and this pandemic has a silver lining to it, in that it's shown us that all these tools that we have at our disposal that maybe are too immature in normal times to really look at for another 5 to 10 years are something we're starting to look at now. And I think that's something that we're going to be able to see the changes from in the next 2 to 3 years, no longer thinking half a decade away to even start to see that. We have a number of great questions in here, and I'll let you take the first crack at answering, but there's some interesting ones. So there's a drive towards gamification, using rewards to incentivize desired behavior. Do you see a threat that we will unintentionally discourage desired behavior that's not incentivized, like charitable work?
It's an excellent question, and there are two parts to my answer. One, as a pain physician, when people would say, "How do you treat pain?" And don't misunderstand me. I would implant intrathecal pumps and spinal cord stimulators and prescribe opioids and do all the fancy hand waving stuff. But at the end of the day, it was 2 words: behavior modification. And it's that people who come with pain, they're saying it's not working. This model is not working. And so they're seeking for a change. And so, yes, I believe that gamification is the technological representation of behavioral modification. We want to do things differently, and the best way to do things differently is through fun. That's the funification of life. My 14-year-old, go read something. I don't want to read. And then, you make it a little bit interesting on this, and she'll spend the whole day reading and knowing exactly everything. So there are ways to attract the brain to be engaged. The second, however, part of it is that we have to do it carefully. We have to design it. We have to understand it. And so that's why I think that blockchain is such a powerful tool, because it's not set in stone. You can always fork, or you can always create a new model. You can always reiterate. You can always improve on it. And it's when I explain Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, programmable money, then you can program it to do whatever you want. So I can give you $10 and tell you to buy tomatoes, but you can also buy drugs. But if I give you a digital asset or some type of coin that is designed only to do that behavior that maybe we agreed upon, that is a result of a decision making, not a top-down thing, but just agreeing to it, I think that we do have to be mindful, especially for vulnerable populations. And I work a lot in Africa, and I'm very attuned to what I call technological colonialism. We should be very careful to not impose all these solutions that we, in our developed world and our imagination of how things actually do work in other countries, do. And so I'm very, very protective of and attuned to make sure that the things that we build together empower them and represent what they want and what they want to do with their lives, without being prescriptive or self-defining. And that's why the idea of charitable, vulnerable populations, marginalized populations, vulnerable, is something that are very attuned, because these are exactly our blind spots.
Excellent. So a couple of questions have come in more on messaging than the message, and I want to touch on a couple of those. This one I'm going to speak to briefly, and then if Alex, if you've got anything else, or Yael, if you've got anything else. Storytelling is always challenging. What was your success stories when you were able to grab massive audience who had no idea about blockchain? And I think that's a critical question to consider is how we talk about this. One of the things that happened to me is I found out about blockchain in 2016, having no technical background and being a scientist and having worked in really a policy role in DC, where I was, writing for Congress or writing for senior leaders who had no knowledge of science or medicine at all. So I was used to having to craft a message the right way. And I got out and I started seeing the blockchain world and looking at the science world that I know. And these groups weren't even talking to each other when they were talking past each other. The misunderstandings of how medical research worked and how blockchain worked was something that wasn't connecting. So making a simple story that got everybody on the same page was very important for me. And I couldn't do that myself. And that's why I was very pleased to have a journalist, a professional, as a co-author, so that a message that was easier to tell or easier for people to absorb was something we put out there rather than just another technical manual. And for me, that's important. So I think making sure you're speaking not always to a technical audience when you're talking about technical things, but to the 99% of people who won't know the technical details, but will be the end users if it's successful. And so I think that's important, is making it simple.
I totally want to second that, Sean. And I always say to myself that when I go to a bookstore and I will find blockchain books not in the business section, but rather in the social studies and the philosophy section, then I'll know that people really understand what are we talking about. I recall quite an intense panel that I had at Midtown before COVID with investors who are not the I would say, more charitable or kind audience. And one of them that I did not know, that probably I was supposed to know in Kiss's Ring, said, well, why would I invest in this shit? And and everybody was like, ooh, and I said, first of all, I think that the fertilizer market or the fertilizer industry is a multi-billion-dollar market, and I would advise you to invest in it. But the second thing, more importantly, is I said investing, and for that matter, explaining technology, is like being vegan. Okay, some people are vegan because they believe that it's better for your health. Some of them just, they don't like how animals are treated. And some just do it because they like to annoy everyone. So each and every one has a different take. And so there's not a one narrative to say. I have behind me SDGs that I'm sure everybody in this group immediately, without even reading the fine print, just seeing these colorful squares, knew that these are SDGs, because it sits etched in their mind that if we want to save ourselves and save the planet, this is the best roadmap. This is like the standard model of physics right now to help us get up. Doesn't mean that we won't find more elements. It doesn't mean that we might find, the gravitron. It doesn't mean that there's nothing more to add. But as it is now, this is the best that we have. And I don't show this background to all panels that I sit with. And so I don't think as much as the storytelling is challenging, what is challenging is understanding the why. We don't always sit and ask ourselves why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? Why is this adapt? Because blockchain is not a one thing, it's blockchain and. So what is blockchain and IoT? What is blockchain and artificial intelligence? What is our blockchain and genomics? What is blockchain and finance? And one of the chats wrote that it's for all industries. Absolutely. And so by no means I want people to leave with the impression that, that's blockchain is everything and all that. I remember once there was something broken in the house and said, how do you fix it? And my daughter shouted, ask dad, probably with blockchain. So I don't want it to be the cortisol of everything, put cortisol on everything, but it definitely is a different mindset. And I remind people that technology does absolutely nothing. It's people that do things with that technology.
And that's back to the original theme of one of the sections of the book, which is blockchain is people. It's not that it doesn't have a critical technical element, but if you don't have everybody on the same page with an agreed upon governance, you've got an app you're using by yourself, and that's easier to do in some verticals, finance, where everybody has the same conceptual idea of how money works and an exchange works, and I think that's why it took off in that industry so quickly. But plus the money as a feedback loop for more R&D, of course. But I think that the human first element is key in every application, and it's harder in more complex ones. And medicine and science are not simple systems, and the data in them and what that requires to be agreed upon across different, what oncologists may agree upon is not what neurologists may agree upon. So do you need different blockchains for those two areas? We don't know yet. But that agreement of humans is going to be key for any application of this. Another messaging question going back to some of the things you said earlier, Alex. You identified a core people issue being the cost of change via the 5 stages of grief. Do you see a key off-chain opportunity in messaging, essentially a smarter change management communication plan to avoid mask derangement syndrome? To better adapt to positive behaviors?
Yeah, first of all, I encourage, Yael, I don't know how we do this, but just copy the chat, because these are like one of the best questions I've ever seen in every panel. So we just need to capture all that. And I'm very eager to reach out to everyone and talk about it. So I don't know if there's a way to screenshot everything or just print it. It's amazing questions. But specifically, to this question, I think I have a suspicion that the difficulty in adoption is also generational. My 14-year-old actually gets it totally, and she doesn't understand why it's not like that. I work a lot in Africa, and they have a blockchain parlance without saying blockchain. They understand that. They understand that representative democracy failed us when that these representatives don't represent us anymore. They understand that once upon a time in the village, life was simple and you did everything, including birthing your children. And then life became a little bit more complicated and maybe urbanized, and maybe there were a lot of elements. And so you needed experts. You needed teachers, you needed nurses, midwives, doctors, doulas. Maybe afterwards you needed brokers, investors, politicians. And that was good because it created an economy, a service economy. But it was all based on that these trusted agents will represent you. And at some point in the developed world, or in, I would say, capital-based societies, the incentives created an economy or a reality where it was allowed and afterwards even encouraged to just represent ourselves and not anymore the agent upon which we were supposed to represent. And so the younger generation, that be it either more naive or digital native, understand that we don't need these intermediaries. We've learned it quickly because suddenly we Zoom. So, we're doing stuff that 4 months ago we never thought that we could do. How is it that I'm not going to the office? How is it that I'm not doing this? Now, obviously we pay a price. There's a mental health price to pay. Like when you're hungry, you can't stop thinking about food. And so if you're, torn from your friends, you can't stop thinking about them. So I'm not saying that this is the other extreme. But what I'm saying is that this is an opportunity to Marie Kondo our lives, to really ask ourselves, what do I really, 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 and then another 3 times, really, really, really need? And so I am open to other voices from other diverse horizons to open my blind spots and try to understand what is the best way to communicate these things. I simply found that the best way that I communicated it is to show that it is authentic, that it comes from a good place, and not only that it's fearless, but also it's selfless. And I think that that's what people like to see. They like to see that there's no, and going back to Kant's, instrumentalization. We're not trying to sell anything. This conversation is not about, buy our stuff. It's sharing people what we know, having them get to that aha moment. And if they ask, so what do you think is the best? So what do you think we should do? Should it be I saw a question, Hyperledger? Should it be Ethereum? Should it be Consensus Health? Should it be Alex? Should it be Sean? Should it be Yael? Should it be all of you? I think people first, product second, profits third, and not the other way around that we mixed.
Excellent, excellent. And thank you, Alex. We both thank you. There are a ton of great questions, as you said. I have captured them, so we'll see if we can find another way to even address some of them. And I thank you all who've attended and asked all these questions. We are going to put this recording up, but I also don't want people coming out of here late and getting to the next meeting late and not being able to come next week. So we are gonna break now, and Randall was kind enough to put in the chat the link. If you haven't gotten the book and you would like to get the book, it's available. But we want to continue to talk about some of these ideas, to do the re-interviews. So we'll be back here next week. Heather Flannery is going to join us. Many of you know who she is. And then Dr. Tiffany Gray is going to join us next week. So we're going to be talking through some other aspects. I'll dive into a little more specific detail about the book, so we start to review some of that as well in the light of the current pandemic. But I think this has been a great kickoff conversation. I hope you all be able to join us. We may use a different forum, but you'll get an email with all the registration and access since you came here through the Eventbrite follow-up. So thank you, Dr. Cahana, and everybody else. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you next week.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
Bye,
Have
Sean.
a wonderful day. Take care.